had such massive amounts of drugs pouring into our country, and by the way, you'll never solve the problem without the death penalty. Well, that's ridiculous and false for reasons we'll come to. But then as soon as he became the president, at the beginning of this year, one of the very first things that he did was issue an executive order 14164, quote, restoring the death penalty. And this is not to happen. Even this year, with 44 executions so far, it would take nearly 50 years to kill all those people. So something's got to give, right? I mean, these people on death row have either got to get off death row in some way, or they're going to get killed. And this is the problem that we face, and this is what I've been worried about for quite a long time. Because even if they killed someone every weekday for a whole year, that's 260 people, it's still going to take over 8 years to kill everyone, and that would be a total bloodbath. Our problem is, what's going to stop that? Up till now, we've had the courts, and this chap here is Larry Lonchar. In the 1990s, I was representing Larry. It was honestly, I wrote a book about him and my dad, because both of them were bipolar. My dad was bipolar in a very manic way. Larry was bipolar in a totally depressed way almost all the time. Just very rarely would he get manic. And Larry was on death row for something that he didn't do, but he was involved. And he was never going to get out of prison, was Larry. And he was from up north, and he hated the Georgia prison system. And he kept trying to commit suicide by electric chair. And he would drop his appeals, and I took his case on. And we went on with this for 8 years. And it was tough, you know. Sometimes you have to ask yourself, what right do we have to stop someone from committing suicide when they're really miserable and we can't solve their problem? And I agonized over that. I talked about it with my mum a lot, but she was in the Samaritans. I talked about it with other people. A lot of people said, oh, you know, why are you wasting time? I mean, there are hundreds of people on death row who want your help, and Larry doesn't. And at any rate, he dropped his appeal several times. We came within 40 minutes of his execution 4 times. And each time I got it stopped at the last minute. The one that really, oh gosh, when I was, you know, the bit I wrote in the book about this, I had to read it for some tape. And when I got to this bit, I was on the phone with the clerk of court of the US Supreme Court. And I'm asking him if we're going to get a stay. And he says, can you wait a minute? And I said, well, actually, no, I can't. We haven't got a minute, because we were just about a minute before Larry was scheduled to be killed. And so we got a stay from the Supreme Court with 58 seconds left to go. And I hate to think what that did to Larry, but I know it gave me PTSD. And, you know, we got it stopped all those times. And then the last time, Larry got Jesus, and he decided he wanted to die anyhow, so he dropped his appeals again. And I went to see him, and I'd always talked him out of it before, and, you know, I'm sitting there saying, should I have a go at him about his notion he's going to heaven? No, that would just be unfair and unpleasant. And so, anyway, my wife and I were driving down to attend his execution. You know, one of, I think, my duties is to be there for Larry, because goodness knows the other people in there are not his friends. And so, anyways, we stopped at a truck stop. I got him on the phone, and he said, oh, you know, I want you to pick up my appeals again. So I start arguing with the judge and the state's attorney. This is outside a toilet on the motorway in Georgia. And there's all these big truckers with their coveralls walking by to go to the toilet. And I'm arguing with the judge. And Larry's on the phone still with them. And he says, oh, how's Clive? And Em says, oh, he's happy as a clam. He's off tilting at windmills as usual. And Larry said, this always tears me up. He said, well, I know he won't be able to stop it, but I wanted to give him one last chance because he's the only friend I've ever had. And that was very touching. I went to his execution. He died a very happy man, bizarrely. And his final words were, Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I hope some of the Christians in there watching that wondered for a minute as to whether, you know, God was playing some joke on him, sending the second coming back as a death row prisoner. But back then, we would have a Supreme Court that would do the right thing. And that's what stopped executions. That's not true today. In the last 5 years, since Trump put his last person on the court, and there are 6 Catholics, all of whom are very right-wing. They've granted only 2 stays of execution. They used to do lots of them. And they've vacated stays that were entered in lower court cases. So that's why people are just going through. I mean, once you get to that final part now, the poor guy's as good as dead. And so whether Trump is behind it or not, there's going to be a bloodbath. There's really not much that we can do about it. There'll be some clemency. You know, California won't execute anyone as long as Newsom is governor. But there are going to be a lot of people killed in the next few years. And we have to think, what can we do to turn this horror into something more positive? And there is something. We've always got to think of that. We can't always stop people from doing the dreadful things they want to do. But we can at least turn them into a positive solution sometimes. And I sort of hate to say this because it sounds a bit as if I'm taking pleasure of the fact that my poor clients are getting killed. You know, far from it. It's horrendous, but we've still got to use it in the right way. And this is how we do it. Justice Scalia said, quote, "There's not a single case, not one, in which it's clear that the person was executed for a crime he didn't commit." He's saying that of the 1,650 people we've executed, all of them were guilty. The legal term for that is utter bullshit. I mean, we've exonerated 200 people off death row now, and there's more than that that we didn't exonerate who I think were probably innocent. The Chief Justice now, who seems like a fairly nice chap, when he was being confirmed, he was asked about all these exonerations that we were getting. I've had a number of them myself, and it's a great privilege. And he said that death row exonerations demonstrate that the legal system's safeguards are working. Total rubbish. You know, this is Glyn Simmons, who was 19 when he was sentenced to death. He was exonerated after 48 years facing the death penalty. That can't really be seen as a system that's working. But we've got to think about how we can really disprove all the foolishness that comes out of it. And when I was doing trials in America, we took advice from Mother Jones. You pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living. Since I've been back in Britain, and, you know, honestly, I don't every few weeks that I have to go to. There's a lot more time to do what I really want to do, which is get my revenge for what they did to Edward L. Johnson. Some of you may have seen the film 14 Days in May. If you haven't, and you feel like getting truly depressed, you know, pour your favorite drink and go on YouTube and Google, or whatever you do on YouTube, 14 Days in May. And it's 90 minutes of an extraordinary documentary. And I'll tell you, when Paul Heyman was making that film, I told him I was going to give him a bad ending to his film, by which I meant I was going to stop his execution. I was young, I was arrogant, I was 26, 27. I'd never lost a case at that point, and I didn't know what I was doing. If I knew then what I know now, that guy, Edward Johnson, would be alive today. And I walked with him into the gas chamber on May the 20th, 1987. And we'd just been sitting with the warden, Don Cabana, who was a decent guy, and he did everything he could to make a nightmare less nightmarish. But when he was asked what his final words were, Edward said, "I'm innocent, warden, I'm at peace with my God, how are you going to be with yours?" And Don Cabana was not at peace for what he had to do that night, and neither was I. And frankly, the project I'm now working on is my little piece of revenge, not in a negative way, in a positive way, for what they did to Edward Johnson. And it's called the Post Mortem Project. And this is where I want to represent, I am representing, and have been for now the last 7 years, a large number of people who have already been executed. So I got all these clients who are dead. And what we did to begin with was we went through all 1,650 cases and looked at their last words. And while that's not proof positive, if you say, "I'm really sorry I did it," you know, that's fairly strong evidence that you probably did. But if you say, I didn't do it, that is at least a reasonable place to begin. And I do love some of those last words. Roy Hogg Roberts in Missouri, one of my favorites. You're killing an innocent man and you all can kiss my ass. And I think that's the sort of way you want to go out. And all of these statements are a real hint. Jim Bethard, a remarkable case. Jean Hathorne testified against Jim, saying Jim did this triple murder of Jean's dad, his stepmother, and his half-brother. And Jean was the person who was going to get the reward, not the reward, the insurance policy proceeds. But he testified against Jim, saying he was the one who did it, thinking naively, he was a bit too smart for himself, that he got a deal out of that. Well, he hadn't got a deal. And when they got to the end of that trial, the DA turned around and prosecuted Jean Hathorne and actually argued to the jury, anyone who believes this guy's story at Jim Bethard's case has got to be a one-eyed hunting dog, was the words he used. Now, because Jean changed his story more than 30 days after Jim was sentenced to death, under Texas law, it was too late as new evidence. And Jim went through all his appeals and was executed for something he almost certainly didn't do. And at the same time, actually, Jean Hathorne managed to get off death row and died himself of natural causes a couple of years ago. But we got all of these cases, and I've got some students who are doing a film about Jim Bethard's case now. And this is our duty. The next one we had, Les Bauer. When I read his case, I thought, that guy did it. Les was accused of murdering 4 people, and there was, all this evidence that made him look pretty guilty. And I thought, this is a pretty hopeless case. And the main reason I wanted to look into it was because his cousin had taken on the name from that book. And he was a lawyer, and now I'm going to blank on the name of the guy. Who was a lawyer in that famous film I can't remember it now, but anyway, it was a famous film out of Georgia. And I was sort of interested that this kid had taken on the name of a TV lawyer and had become a lawyer. But Les, we started looking into his case, and we discovered that there were 3 other suspects whose wife and partner and son all were willing to go on record saying that they did the murder, not Les. And there were 4 people total. And they held a hearing, and the judge said, well, I think a jury would acquit him at a retrial, but unfortunately that's too late. And Les was executed. And his daughter, Leslie, is just determined to exonerate her dad. And she's a wonderful woman, a hairdresser who just talks a million miles a minute. And we've got some people doing a podcast on that. And my plan had been that we'd do documentaries and podcasts, we'd do music, we'd do books, we'd do social media. The 2 things I really want to do, and I'm telling you this because I expect your help on all this, is first a video game. The video game would be Jim Jones, ace prosecutor, strapline. Any prosecutor can convict a guilty person, but it takes an ace to convict an innocent person. And then what you have to do to win the game is make all the unethical decisions that the police and prosecutors and even defense lawyers made throughout the case. And then you can only win the game by doing all the awful things they did. I think that'd just be fun. My son would get off on it. He'd probably play it 1,000,000 times. Then there was this guy in Liverpool who's offered to help making a virtual reality of the day of your execution. I just think that would be morbid and horrible and get people to see what it's like, and you have to recite the last words of one of these cases. So if we can exonerate people, that and create a database of all the evidence of innocence of people who've been executed, I think that'll go a long, long way towards ending the death penalty, and this is one of my great ambitions. So here we are. This is it. Right now, There have been 1,650 executions, and there are 204 cases that are very promising. I eliminated some. We gathered up the evidence for all of these cases, or most of them. It's a huge amount of work pulling this stuff together. I probably got, most of 1 million pages of documents in my database now over the last 7 years, with tremendous help from other people. My students who work on it. It's really fabulous because they do immensely good work, but also it's a great training thing for them. The way I was trained back in the early 80s was I tried my first capital case on the back of John Pope, who was a guy, I really liked John. I didn't know what I was doing. And John was sentenced to death back then, and I'm glad to say we got him off death row, but you shouldn't learn your trade by getting your clients on death row. So this is just a wonderful thing where I have my students work on the case theory memos and taking all the documents, figuring out everything we know about the case, and then I raise some money, send them to Texas to go and actually talk to the witnesses, the jurors, everyone. And, it's one of those great things that particularly people with a foreign accent, British accent, wandering around Texas with a tape recorder and whatever, you can get people to talk to you always. It's a wonderful thing, and I think a great experience for students to work out how powerful the American system is in exposing falsehoods. In Britain, you sure wouldn't be allowed to talk to jurors. You'd go to jail if you did. You couldn't get the records on all these cases. There isn't a record on many cases, not a trial transcript. There's all sorts of ways that the British cover up their flaws in ways that America doesn't. But it's still tough, and so the students go out and do that. And in the end, we just got to make all of these films, we've got to tell all of these stories, we've got to have a repository of all the evidence of innocence that I hope will then finally satisfy people how incredibly messed up it all is. Because if there are 204 promising cases, that's more than the number of people we exonerated while they were still alive. And I think there'll be more. One of the interesting things to me is the more recent cases, the probability of innocence is going upwards. I thought originally that it would be all the old cases where they messed up, but actually it's even more today. So this is the project we need to do. And look, this is the real issue. What are you going to do to help me? It's not help me, it's help the system learn how flawed the system is. And I hope together that we'll be able to do that. And if anyone has any talent they want, this is not about lawyers, by the way. Facts are what make these cases, not law. So you can be a lawyer if you want, but you don't have to be if you're a journalist, if you're just interested in talking to people, if you're an investigator. Or if you've got these other talents and you want to make podcasts, which I love because they're really easy compared to films, then that's my email, clive@justiceleague.org.uk. Get in touch with me, and I will, I promise you, exploit you. Thank you very much.